Welcome to the channel and welcome to episode 7. This is the final installment of our 7 episodes in 7 days marathon. Keith, what are your thoughts on making it to day 7? Keith, you having a problem there?
Guys, come on. I told you could watch football up to 2 hours ago, but then I needed the studio back to be able to film the very last episode of our 7-day marathon. Oh my gosh.
Ooh,
all right, it
YouTube.
looks like there's a couple of minutes left.
do.
You can finish that. I'm coming back in 15 minutes, and I expect you to be done with all that, get all of this
I'm not
cleaned up,
going anywhere.
so that I can get this YouTube channel stuff going, okay? Come on, guys.
Keith, is there a party going on? We had set up this time to record our new episode.
Guys, I cannot believe that you're still here. I've had it with you guys. I just wish you guys would just disappear.
Keith, everything okay up there?
Yep, everything's good now.
Keith, where'd those guys go?
Let's just say they're gone.
Remind me never to make you angry. So, do you want to introduce today's topic, or do you want me to do it? I'm good if you want to. However you want to do it. Whatever you want to do, that's what I'm good with.
Nah, that's fine. I got it. So, much like in an earlier episode where we talked about converting magnetic media over to digital, in this episode, what we'll talk about is photos, converting printouts, slides, and negatives, converting those over to digital as well.
So we have some other media formats that are at risk?
Yeah, we do have to care about the formats for the same reason as we do for magnetic media, but I think the reasons are different, right? The reasons we care about preserving things might be different when it comes to photos, prints, and slides.
So what are some of the factors that can cause problems for negatives, photos, and slides? I actually thought of all those formats as fairly stable over the long haul.
Well, yeah, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Generally speaking, photo and slide material can be fairly stable, right? However, they will degrade over time, and they're highly susceptible to environmental factors, right? Which is basically saying how and where you store them, right? Now, according to Kodak, that under ideal conditions, negatives can last 1,000 years. But what are ideal conditions? Ideal conditions are like 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 40% humidity, right? So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that most people are not going to be able to achieve that 1,000-year lifespan.
You mean I can't put my Fox photo envelope of developed photos and negatives in the back window of my car for safekeeping?
Okay, now I know you're messing with me, but seriously, that is one of the factors that I will talk about. So are you ready to be serious now and hear my list?
Yeah, let's do this. I'm 100% completely serious now.
Yeah, right. So I know better than that, but let's start anyway. So let's talk about storage of photos, slides, and negatives. So cool, dark, and dry. Those are the 3 adjectives that we're looking for when we're talking about places to store all of those things.
That makes sense, Keith. Many materials break down in heat. Negatives can become brittle if they're stored in heat, and even worse, if the other part of the year where they're being stored, it can become cold. That change from heat to cold over multiple years is really going to cause a problem for them. As well, with the addition of moisture, that's particularly harmful. Add in bright light, and now you have the trifecta that's going to damage your photos, negatives, and slides to varying degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. So how you store each of these items does make a difference, right? So when it comes to negatives, they can be scratched, right? That happens. Really, negatives should be stored in special sleeves that are designed for those negatives to be stored. And often you find that they're not, and that's how scratches happen. In addition to that, slide prints and photo prints, there's quite a big range in terms of the quality of those, and that affects their durability as well. It could be something that you took to a professional lab and got printed out on nice paper. That's going to be the high end. But a lot of photos, let's face it, were just printed out on home inkjet printers back in the day, on just regular copy paper type of paper. That's not good. Those are not going to last very long. It's possible that if you invested in a nice photo quality inkjet printer and had special inks and archival quality paper, that you're going to get better performance in the storage and durability of your photo prints, but even then, not that great. Certainly not 25 years, for example. And then you've got the classic, photo album, right, where your photos are stored inside of a book. And personally, I love that. I love the authentic feel and the quality of going to grandma's house and looking through the photo album. Love that. Love that as an experience, but even that is not ideal over the long haul.
Moisture can also cause photos to stick together, especially those that are printed on more of a raw paper versus more of the glossy finish type that you see today. Another issue with moisture is mold. This seems to happen fairly often with slides for whatever reason. Also, moisture can cause negatives to stick together and damage the emulsions and ultimately the negative itself. You can still scan them, but you're going to have diminished results.
So far we've talked a lot about the risks of storing photo slides and negatives, but honestly, what are we going to do about it, right? Even if we do a perfect job in mitigating those risks and store them perfectly, I mean, if there's a fire or a flood or something, we're still going to be in trouble.
Well, that really brings us to our main topic today. Much like our episode on capturing your videotapes, we're going to talk about the equipment and the process that's necessary to capture your old photos, slides, and negatives. Now, don't get me wrong, nothing's going to replace that cool old print that you have from years and years and years ago, but it's much better to capture that and have it available digitally than to have the worst case scenario happen and lose it forever.
Okay, so I suppose we're either going to need some equipment to digitize all of these photos, slides, and negatives, or we're going to need to use a service provider, kind of like what we talked about back in the episode on videotapes.
You stuck the landing on that one so well that even the Russian judge is going to have to give you a good score. And yes, you are going to need a flatbed scanner with slide and negative adapters if that's the type of media you need to convert. Or you're going to need to locate a local company that's going to do that scanning work for you.
This definitely sounds like it's going to get expensive.
Unfortunately, you're spot on there, Keith. The scanner that I'm going to show and demonstrate going through this process with is rather pricey. If you have a small number of photos, negatives, and slides to scan, it may be well worth your while to go find a local provider to do that work for you, because you may not have a use for this scanner once you've completed the job. Now, if you have a large number of items to scan, you may be able to reach break even, but you do have to factor in your time as well.
Okay, you had my attention at expensive, so let's dig a little deeper.
So what I'm showing here is the Epson model of scanner that I've used for scanning negatives, slides, and photos in the past. To scan slides and negatives, you'll need a scanner that has the ability to remove the white backing that's typically on the lid in order to let that light go through the slides and the negatives and be captured. Now, I have seen online dedicated slide scanners where you place all the slides onto a tray and scan them through. Same thing with negatives, but I have no experience with working with those devices and if they're any good or not. Now, I'm going to recommend a good flatbed scanner that's able to handle all of your scanning needs, but along with being expensive, this is a time-consuming process, so you need to make sure that you factor that into the equation for yourself. Now, typically, you can place your photos right on the scanning bed. The nice thing too is most of the scanners will allow you to place multiple photos on that glass bed at the same time, and if there's enough separation between them, identify separate photos and save them in different files for you. This works really well on 4x6 prints as well as up to a 5x7.
Wait, so you need software to go with the scanner if you want to do it yourself?
Great question, Keith. Yes, we are going to need software to do our scanning. The good news is the scanner that I'm going to demonstrate and have a link to includes that software you're going to need to get great results.
Great. That sounds a lot easier than going to find a scanner and software. This was starting to sound like a lot more work than I was prepared to do myself.
Well, Keith, honestly, if you think getting to this point has been a lot of work, the next step of actually scanning everything is going to be significantly larger amount of work. And so it's probably a good time to evaluate if that's something that you really want to invest that much time to do versus finding a service provider that can do that work for you.
Okay, I think I'm going to wait and watch you do some scans first before I decide if I want to spend the money. Because this actually sounds like a situation where I might be better off paying somebody else to do the work for me. Especially since I'm not sure I would even ever use the scanner again after I finish this project.
Great point, Keith. If you purchase a scanner well suited to this task, what are the odds you're going to need that scanner after the project is done? After all, you're unlikely to shoot photos on film or slides. So, what are you going to use this scanner for after the project is complete?
Yeah, that's great information to keep in mind. For me, I think the final element is going to be the actual process, watching how that unfolds. So why don't we stop yammering about it and just get the party started?
Sounds good, Keith. For this next part, then, I'm going to need to make a quick move over to my desk area. That's going to take me just a couple of minutes to get done. In the meantime, break out the chicks and sticks if you've got them.
Way ahead of you, Bruce. As soon as you said it would take a minute, I already made my move towards the snack bowl.
All right, Keith, I've made the move over to my desk area, and so the first thing that we're going to do is jump in and talk about the scanner we're going to use. That is the Epson Perfection V850 Pro. Now, that scanner comes with the ability to scan photos, negatives, and slides. Now, how it accomplishes that is on the flatbed scanner part itself, we can actually scan a photo by doing nothing extra, but putting the photo on the surface and then closing the lid. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And you notice the white background here. That is what we have for photos. And we'll talk about what we need to do to convert that to scan negatives and slides later. So we need to pre-scan our photo, which technically I've already done here, but we're going to pre-scan it again. So I just go to the pre-scan, press that. It's going to start scanning the image again. We're not really going to notice a change here. But if you notice below our photo, we have a red box. That red box is actually the active area. So we need to move that up, and we're going to make that fit our photo and align it to the edges. So let me just stretch this out. Okay, once we get this aligned exactly where we want it to be, highlighting the areas of the photo that we want to have active in our final scan, and there we go. So I really love this old photo. It's actually of a stock car that my grandfather owned, and his driver got hit by the driver of the other car who came across the infield and crashed into him. Just a cool old photo, in my opinion. I've got a large print of this hanging in the garage. So once we've got our photo outlined and we've got all of our settings confirmed, the dots per inch that we want, which is basically the quality, we've selected the destination where we want to save the file and the file name. We'll also want to make sure we select the file type. I'm going to use TIFF. TIFF is a good, what they call lossless format, where basically it's not going to implement a bunch of compression in order to save space. So with these old photos that I'm trying to preserve for the long term, I don't mind making these files larger. And then obviously we wouldn't need these really high res to print smaller sizes, but for archival purposes, and then if we want to print something large, we can do that. Or if we want a smaller print, we can actually save off a smaller copy. But this way we don't have to rescan going forward. So once I have the name input and all of our other settings are exactly as we want them, we'll go ahead and hit the final scan button. And if we're using this in a batch mode, then we would use the batch scan command instead of just the single scan button. Now this large image is going to take a little bit of time to scan, although the scanner is fairly fast. We'll kind of zip through this process and then our file will be saved. Now certainly the tools that I'm showing you here have lots of settings that you could dig into. If you wanted to go in and do a lot of photo correction, you can do that as well. But you can see it's fairly simple in the grand scheme of things if you just want to keep it basic, and obviously the results are very good. And of course we're dealing with a very old photo, so this particular photo might be one that you take into, say, Photoshop or another photo editing application and touch up and restore, or maybe you like that patina, that it's an old photo look and you want to preserve that. Now the process isn't going to be too much different for negatives, but there are just a few things that we need to touch on. So let's go ahead and head back to the desk and talk about photo negatives and slides. Now speaking of negatives and slides, how do we do those? Well, we'll talk about the scanner preparation real quick in just a minute. But first, let's talk about the media trays that it comes with. These media trays allow us to put various size negatives into a tray to hold them in place. And then what it allows us to do, if you notice if you can see this very well or not, there are actually some corner registration marks that allow us to line this up on the scanning surface and make sure that it's perfectly aligned so that when we scan, the software actually recognizes the tray and knows what types of media we have loaded. Now, along with this medium format tray, we have a large format tray, and we have slide trays. And let me just dig these out here. We also have the 35 millimeter negative trays. Now, if you notice, I'm holding two of these. I did not buy an extra set that actually delivers with both sets of media trays for each type of format that it supports. Now, you might be wondering, why does it come with two sets of trays for each of these formats? Well, it's a workflow consideration. So if you can imagine, once we load up our tray with all of our negatives and we put it on the scanner and we start to scan it, that's going to take some period of time for it to scan. While that's scanning, what we can be then doing in our workflow is loading up the next tray with all of the rest of the negatives, so that when the first tray we had on the scanner is done, we can then swap those out and then do the same thing with the tray we had just scanned. And that allows us to create a more fluid and fast workflow. Let's go ahead and move on to scanning some slides really quick here. So if you notice, I have an entire tray full of slides, and we're just going to do one for illustration purposes. But this holds a total of 12 slides in the tray. So 24 slides at a time we can have in our workflow. One tray that's on the scanner, one tray that we're loading up next. Now, I am going to show you a couple of slides in this tray that actually have some condition issues, and they have to do with how the slides were stored. So let's go ahead and get this on the scanner and go through that process of scanning a tray of slides. Okay, let's go ahead and get our scanner prepared. So I have the slides ready to go in the tray, but we need to prepare the scanner. So the scanner, in order to be prepared, is going to need to have this white piece taken off. So if you notice, that just slides right out. Now we're going to put this aside because we will need it back in there when we go to do photos again. And so then you'll notice, if you look on the scanner itself, you can see that we have the glass showing all the way through. So then we just take our slides. We're going to take our old photo that we just scanned off, and we're going to put this into the tray. And there's actually some marks here. Get this aligned really quick. There's actually pegs in the scanner's flatbed on the plastic side of it that we can use in order to register or align our tray. So once we have that installed and it's all registered and aligned, we're going to go ahead and close the lid. The lid is closed. Now we're going to go ahead and switch over to our software piece. Okay, we have our slide tray loaded into the scanner, and we've done our pre-scan. And you'll notice here that we have something that looks like our slide tray, but it doesn't really look exactly like what we want. So let's go ahead and make some setting changes within the software that's going to allow us to recognize the slides for what they are. So over here, we're going to change that reflective to transparency. Now, as soon as we did that, if you notice, now we actually see some small images that are listed throughout our scanner tray. And let's just go ahead and expand the zone that it's going to be looking at, so we have all of the tray included. And if you notice, we actually have our individual slides here. Now that we have transparency selected, you'll be able to see we can recognize individual slides. Now that we have the selection made from reflective to transparency, we'll either want to use positive or Kodachrome as our setting for the slides. If we change it to negative, you'll notice now that everything looks a little bit out of sync. We can use either the Kodachrome or the positive. Both of them will probably yield about similar results, but I know these are Kodachrome slides, so let's go ahead and use that setting. Notice there wasn't a big change there. Now, if we were to scan right now, what it's actually going to do is scan this as one big image, and we don't actually want that. What we want is the individual slides. So in our software, Silverfast, we're going to want to go into Frame, and then go down to Find Frames. And in our case, we have 35 millimeter. We could also use the All Frames selection and let it decide what it sees. Let's go ahead and force it to slide 35 millimeter. And sometimes you'll find that you do have to do a little bit of playing around with the settings, and then once you have those set, you should be good to go. Okay, so we need to give our scan a destination we want. I do not want this stored in where it was going to default to, so I'm going to go to Pictures, and then from Pictures I'm going to go into the Scan Test folder, and we're going to use a numbering sequence. We'll just stay with image. We're going to eliminate the 1. What I've got going on the B-roll camera right now is actually showing you the scanner working in the particular area it's currently at on the flatbed. So it has a light that shows through the top of the scanner. It's kind of a useful tool, although you can look on the software and see where it's currently at as well. But just visually, it does give you a nice little reference point. Alright, so our scan is done. It's done all 12 images of 12. And so let's go ahead and browse to that folder that it created and take a look at our particular images. So if you notice, we have images 1 through 12 along with our original scan that was a photo. So let's just go ahead and take a look there. And let's actually zoom in just a little bit. So you can see these are pretty decent quality coming from the scans. They're fairly small images, so not a big deal. Now, I told you I wanted to show you what some damaged slides can look like. So this slide is actually, because of the way it was stored, it has a little bit of damage. So let's go ahead and pull this tray out, and we'll find one of these images that is actually damaged. Okay, so I'm going to hold this damaged slide up to the camera just a little bit, and you might be able to begin to see where that damage is located on the slide. It's going to show up in the form of splotchiness. And so this is damage that the slide has incurred from the storage process. And really, you know, that's something that potentially can be fixed on here. But you'll notice that's pretty extensive damage. And so restoring this image is going to take quite a bit of work. Might even have to be taken to a professional in order to clean that particular damage up. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at scanning some negatives here. So here I've got a tray of some really interesting size negatives. These again were part of the group of negatives and photos that I found at my grandfather's place in New York. And so let's go ahead and get this on here. You know, I'm not really sure that this is how the tray was intended to be used. If you notice, there's actually 3 registration marks where it was planning on a different size negative being put in here, but I found a creative way that if I put both these in here and then told the scanner that I had 2 images in here to scan, it would actually work. So it's pretty adaptable in the process, and you could run across some negatives that you have to be maybe a little bit creative in how you put them into the tray and start to scan those. So let's go ahead and just do a little prefetch of our images and see what we've got on hand here. Okay, so we have placed our negatives into our tray again. We've put the tray into the scanner. We've aligned it through the registration pegs with the tray and the scanner bed, and now we've done our pre-scan. So our pre-scan is showing us what looks like a negative, but here's the thing, we don't want it to look like a negative. We want it to recognize that it is a negative, and when we're done with our scan, we want that to show up as the image that we would actually print. So let's address what's actually wrong here. So in our settings, what we have to do is, the reason this is showing this way is this is exactly as we would see this negative with our eyes. So our eyes are seeing this as a positive and not the image. So what we need to do is actually change, transparency is correct, but our setting of it being a positive is incorrect. We need to change that over to negative. And as soon as we do, now you can see what looks like a black and white photo presented on the screen versus the negative as we would see it. So now we have just a couple more steps left here. What we need to actually do is show the scanner what our negative area is, or the image area that we want to capture, and save. And again, if we had a whole box of these like I do, what we'd want to do is make sure that we are setting this up as a batch scan, and then our batch scan would have these defined areas, and hopefully we'll get images that match each other. One thing you'll find about the negatives that I'm showing here is they were not cut particularly accurately or consistently, so there's a lot of cropping that I'm doing to get them aligned as well. I'm having to adjust each time that I scan a set of images. I have to adjust the frame that it's within because not all of the negatives are the same size. But let's go ahead and use this other frame or this other negative as our starting point. So let's hit that duplicate, and as soon as I do, down here in the corner you'll see that the number 1 became a number 2, and we're going to slide that image identifier. We're going to slide that image identifier down, and when we do, we need to adjust its size because it is not the same size as the image above it. So now I've got both areas identified. I'm going to adjust this top one just a little bit because I don't like where that is at. So we're going to go ahead and drag this down just a little bit to crop that and get as straight an image as we can without losing too much data. Looks like I'm pretty happy with those. I'm going to just double check and maybe drop that ever so slightly to clean up that raw edge. Okay, I've got the images where I want them to be identified, and let's go ahead and go to that image and batch scan again. And when we do so, it's going to come up and ask us where to put these files, and so let's go ahead and go with our pictures and our scan test, and we're going to change this to -1. Oops, actually we're going to put the 1 in our sequencing here and add a space, and let's go ahead and hit scan. So there we go. It's going to start scanning our first image. So if you notice on the screen in this area it says image 1 of 2. So it's scanning that first image, then it's going to move on to the second one. Just like when we had 12 images for the slides, it's going to do all of them we've identified and then save them with their unique names, numbered 1 through 2 in this case, but in the slides case it was 1 through 12. And again, that sequencing will continue on. If we do another tray of the same size negative, then it's going to then start with negative number 3 and 4 and so on and so forth. Okay, well let's go check out our results here. So here is our -1. That was the image that was captured. And here is our -2. So this was a used car lot. Back again, this is probably in the neighborhood of a 60 or 70-year-old photo. And we had it in the form of a negative. And it looks like I still have some of the raw edge of this negative, so you certainly could go back and crop some of these, which is probably going to be an expectation if you're dealing with some of these raw cut negatives like I am dealing with. So let's go ahead then and take a look at if we want to scan multiple photos on the same flatbed sheet. Okay, well I have photos loaded into the scanner, but we have to make sure that we take care of one thing first. And that is, we are currently set up for negatives right now, and we need to convert back to the reflective mode. So we need to put that element back into place that allows us to scan photos on the flatbed. So let's just put that piece back in, which, there we go. It's now installed again. So let's go ahead then and change our software settings over to reflective again. We are going to scan a positive, and let's go ahead then and pre-scan and see what we get. Now what I've loaded into the scanner is 3 photos in order to save us some time. So you can see it's bringing up what it has as a default, and so we need to set our zone area here. So we've got 2 photos going one direction and another photo going the other, and it shows this one is photo 1. So let's go ahead then and go to our frame selection and hit duplicate. So now we have that number 2, and oddly enough they don't really line up perfectly, and that might be just how I loaded them in the scanner, so we'll just go ahead and get that so they're lined up. And now let's go ahead and duplicate this again under frame, and we can slide this down, and we have number 3. but obviously this is oriented completely different. So let's go ahead and change this over and over, and there we go. So I think we've probably got our areas defined pretty darn well. So then, once we've done that, let's go ahead then and select where we want these photos to go. We're going to pick our scan test again. And let's change our name to photo. That should work. And let's go ahead then and go to our batch scan. So something I'd forgotten about the software is you can define that on the front end, but when you do a batch scan, it's going to have a different set of parameters. So not a big deal. We'll just go to our photos again, our pictures, and select that scan test. And we'll go with photo again. And I like that space, and we're going to have it start with 1. So we're going to go ahead then and hit scan, and now it's going to scan our 1 and 3 images. Now, one thing about this particular process is because I'm using photos and I'm just kind of aligning them wherever I want, each time that we place the photos on the flatbed, we're probably going to have to do a little bit of adjustment to those frames because they're not going to align perfectly with what I had done. You could probably try and put some tape on the plastic portion of the scanner in order to identify where you had placed photos before to give you a better idea, and then maybe you're just slightly adjusting where that's at each time, or maybe you're able to get them directly on those locations and it's not a big deal. It is already done with our scan, so that's pretty fast. Now, I do get asked the question, okay, so if I have the photos that are already printed and I have them like this, but I also have available to me the negatives, which one should I use? Well, I can tell you this, that we have these trays for holding the negatives, and I've loaded one up, and even not really optimizing this, although I didn't have any smaller cuts than this, so I could maximize this. This tray has got 3 strips, and each strip has got 4 photos or 4 images in it. So I've got 12 photos here versus I could only fit 3 on my flatbed scanner. So from a pure efficiency perspective, we're going to be able to scan more at one time. But how are those images going to compare? Well, let's go ahead and scan those and see if there is any quality difference between the negative being scanned and that photo. So let me just reset everything again. We're going to take that reflective element off the scanner, get it ready for negatives, and then we'll start this back up as soon as I'm done with that. Okay, I have loaded the scanner with the negative tray, and we are ready to do our pre-scan. So let's go ahead then and pre-scan that. And again, why does this not look right? Well, we still have it on reflective and positive, so we need to change that over to transparency. And we are set to negative still, so we should be good to go here. Let's pre-scan this. So our frames are all defined incorrectly because of the it's still being set to the old negative format. So let's go ahead and go to frame, and let's go to delete all, and let's drag our window here to include a new area. Okay. And there we go. And then let's go ahead then and tell it to find frames. And in this case, we need to do the film strip 35mm holder. So it has found all of our images successfully. And so we are ready to do our batch scan. And if you notice, it really didn't matter how well I aligned these negatives within the holder. So it's going to actually search that out each time. Now, going forward, that may be an issue for us. So you may want to choose to align it on one end or the other, or you're going to have to make some slight adjustments to each of your frames, or each time just run that frame finder again, delete the old frames, and then have it find them. That might be faster than trying to adjust each one. But you'll get used to a workflow and decide what works best for you in that process. So let's go ahead then and go to our image and batch scan again. And let's do this as second negative. And we're going to take out that 1, and we're going to start this at 1, and we're going to include that space and go ahead and put it in our scan test folder. There we go. And so it's going to name it second negative and then numbered 1 through 12. So let's go ahead and hit our scan. And I'll fast forward through this so that you can get to the end faster. Okay, so we have our photo scan on the left and our negative scan on the right. And the first thing that jumps out at me is the dynamic range on the negative scan is considerably better. You can see a lot more of the detail. Now, some of the color on the photo scan is pleasing, but I think we could probably accomplish about the same result on the negative scan by bringing that into Photoshop. Again, what jumps out to me here on the comparison with the photo on the left and the negative scan on the right is the dynamic range, or the detail that you can see on that negative scan. See how much more the clouds are defined, and you can actually see those. Now, one thing I am seeing a little bit of is maybe some grain from the scan on the negative side, so that might be a situation where I can do just a little bit of adjustment to get that looking the way I want to. But overall, I'm probably happier with the negative scan versus the photo.
Wow, that's a ton of information. I wonder if the smart play might be to pull the old Tom Sawyer and drag all my photos over to my buddy's house who's got all the stuff and kind of trick him into doing it all for me.
Keith, I'm right here and I can still hear you. Remember, we're still doing the show?
Sometimes I forget when I think like that you can actually hear me. Oh well. Hey, you know what I just realized? We've just completed our 7th episode in 7 days, and you're still here.
Keith, this has been an absolutely amazing experience, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you get notified when we put out our next episode.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a couple of weeks. Let's set the expectation low. I've got quite a few honeydew items that have been on the list being ignored, let's say, over the past couple of weeks while we've been filming these 7 episodes.
I hear you clucking, big chicken, and I'm at the back of that boat rowing too.
Seriously though, we do sincerely appreciate everybody who tuned in over the past 7 episodes and subscribed and liked our videos. So any questions, comments, hopes, dreams, needs, fears, or funny stories, please comment, subscribe, like, ring the bell, and please use those affiliated links that are down below in this episode or any of the other episodes. It really will help.
Keith, I'm going to let the girls close this one out. I did want to stop and say thank you one more time, and you'll see us next time on Dad's Talk Tech.
Okay, for those of you that don't know, this is the like button. This is the subscribe button. Is this clear? Clear as a bell. Oh yeah, almost forgot the bell. Now you know what to do.